The courtroom was suffocatingly silent. All eyes were fixed on the judge, an older man with an air of impatience, his gavel resting heavily in his hand. Across the room, Maya Carter, a determined black woman in her mid-30s, gripped the edges of the plaintiff's table. Her heart pounded, but her face remained composed. This wasn't just a case, it was her life. She had fought for this moment, believing in justice. Yet as the judge exhaled sharply and adjusted his glasses, her stomach twisted. "Case dismissed," he muttered, his voice devoid of emotion. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Maya's attorney stammered, "Your Honor, but the evidence—" The judge shook his head. "Insufficient." A dismissive thud of the gavel. Maya felt the air rush from her lungs. Was this really happening? Years of pain erased in seconds. But then, her phone buzzed. One unread message. Her fingers trembled as she unlocked the screen. What she read changed everything. Maya Carter wasn't just another face in the crowd. She was a force. Her presence in the courtroom had a quiet intensity. Something about the way she held herself spoke of years of struggle and resilience. Standing at 5'7", with tightly coiled curls that framed her sharp features, she looked like she could take on the world. But the weight of that day's outcome, the weight of that dismissal, was different. It was like she'd been carrying the world on her shoulders, and with one sentence the ground had been pulled out from beneath her. Growing up in the heart of Brooklyn, Maya had always understood that life wasn't going to hand her anything. It wasn't like the fairy tales her teachers told her in class, where heroes won by simply being good. Maya's heroes had to fight for every inch. Her mother, a nurse who worked double shifts just to keep a roof over their heads, had taught her the value of hard work. Her father, a civil rights lawyer who had passed when she was just 12, had shaped Maya's belief in justice, even when it seemed like it was always just out of reach. In the neighborhood, Maya was known as a fighter. Not the kind to start trouble, but the kind to finish it. She wasn't afraid to speak up for what was right. In fact, she had been the one to lead community protests when a local school district tried to close a public high school that had served the black and brown communities. For decades, she'd rallied hundreds of people, creating change with nothing more than a bullhorn and the power of her voice. Her journey to law school had been no less difficult. The dream was hers, but it came at a price. Maya had always been a star student, top of her class in high school, earning scholarships and accolades. But none of it came easy. There were always whispers, the kind you could almost taste. The assumptions people made about who she was because of where she came from. A young black woman, the child of an immigrant nurse, had no business being in a place like Columbia Law School. She had earned every seat she took, but even as she walked those hallowed halls, she was reminded day after day of the prejudices that surrounded her, the professors who assumed she didn't belong, the classmates who didn't quite know how to talk to her, let alone see her as their equal. Maya's drive was rooted in those moments, the quiet microaggressions she faced, and the louder, more glaring ones that she'd have to confront in the courtroom. The case she had been fighting now wasn't just any case, it was personal. The plaintiff was a black woman named Tanya Miller, who had been wrongfully fired from her position as a senior executive at a major corporation. Tanya was a woman who had built her career from the ground up, overcoming countless obstacles in a predominantly white industry, only to be dismissed without cause or explanation. Maya had taken the case pro bono after hearing Tanya's story. In a coffee shop one afternoon, where the older woman had been sitting alone, her eyes empty of hope. Tanya had confided in Maya, her voice barely above a whisper, as she detailed the racism and sexism she'd faced for years at the company. That was when Maya made the decision. She wasn't going to let Tanya's story be buried. She couldn't. Maya could never forget the pain of watching her own mother struggle against the oppressive systems that sought to break them. And Tanya's case, like so many others, was another fight against the injustices that ran deep through society's veins. But now, standing in that cold, sterile courtroom, it seemed like everything was falling apart. The judge's ruling had felt like a gut punch, a blow that went deeper than just one person's career. It felt like a reminder that, no matter how hard one fought, some battles would never be won. Maya had spent countless hours preparing for This case, meticulously organizing documents, finding witnesses, and digging into the legalities of Tanya's dismissal. She had believed in the evidence. She had believed that it was enough to win. Yet here she stood, defeated. The courtroom, which had once felt like the stage where Maya could make her stand, now felt like a prison. The high, whitewashed walls seemed to close in around her, the cold marble floors offering no comfort. The clinking of pens, the shuffling of papers. Every small sound felt like it reverberated through her chest. This was supposed to be the place where justice lived, but today it felt like the opposite. The bailiff's voice broke through her thoughts. "All rise," he commanded, his tone more mechanical than respectful. Maya stood, her back straight, the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. The judge's ruling was final, but her fight wasn't over. Not yet. As she exited the courtroom, Maya's eyes scanned the crowd of onlookers. Her team, young, eager, passionate, stood, together, expressions heavy with defeat. She wanted to say something to reassure them, to remind them that they hadn't failed, but the words wouldn't come. She could only nod, pushing past them toward the door. Outside, the bright sunlight hit her like a slap. She blinked, adjusting to the harsh light. The world seemed to keep moving, indifferent to the storm raging in her heart. And that was when her phone buzzed. The message she'd been waiting for all day. Tanya had texted her. It was just one line, but in that moment it felt like the only thing that mattered. "Maya, I don't know how to thank you, but I've just been offered a settlement. It's huge. This isn't over. I believe in you." Maya paused in the middle of the street, her heart skipping a beat. Tanya's words, filled with gratitude and renewed hope, didn't just change the course of the case, they changed Maya herself. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments there was still light, still hope, still the possibility of victory. The sun dipped low in the sky as Maya made her way back to the office. Her steps were heavy, the weight of the judge's ruling still pressing down on her chest. The victory she'd hoped for, the breakthrough that would have validated all of her work, now felt like a distant dream. But Tanya's text message had ignited a spark of something in her, something that wasn't quite hope, but more like a defiant refusal to back down. As she entered the office, she found her colleagues gathered around the table, faces filled with quiet concern. Maya had worked with them day in and day out, building a team that was as committed to justice as she was. But now, she saw the doubt flickering in their eyes. They had believed in the case. They had believed in her. "What now?" asked Rachel, a young associate whose determination often outshone her experience. She had been the first to jump in when Maya brought the case to the firm, eager to prove that a black woman could stand toe-to-toe with corporate giants. Maya let out a long breath, rubbing her temples. "We keep fighting. We don't let it end here." "But Maya," Rachel continued, her voice wavering, "the judge dismissed the case. It's over. The legal system just shut us down. What more can we do?" Maya looked up at Rachel, seeing the exhaustion in her eyes. She had been working around the clock, pushing herself to the brink to help Maya. Maya understood that, but this moment, it was different. "I know it feels like a dead end, but we've been here before. You've seen it." Maya's voice dropped to a low, urgent whisper. "People of color, they've been getting knocked down for centuries, and every time, they get back up. We don't stop here." "But how?" Rachel asked, almost pleading. "How do we fight a system that's designed to crush people like us?" Before Maya could respond, Caleb, the firm's senior partner, walked into the room. His cold eyes immediately locked onto hers. Caleb was a man who understood the inner workings of the legal world better than anyone. He was sharp, calculating, and had a reputation for bending the rules when necessary. But the look on his face now was not one of support. It was one of cold pragmatism. "Maya, we need to talk," Caleb said, his voice clipped. Maya's stomach twisted. Caleb had always been a supporter, but something about the way he said it made her uneasy. She stood up slowly, excusing herself from the group. They walked to his office in silence, the tension thick between them. When the door clicked shut behind them, Caleb didn't waste any time. "You need to let this go," he said flatly, sitting down behind his desk. "We've done everything we can. The judge has spoken. This case is a lost cause." Maya's blood ran cold. "What do you mean, let it go?" She was incredulous. "We're not just going to walk away from a woman's life like that. This isn't about just one case, Caleb. This is about something much bigger." Caleb leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers in front of his face. "Look, I get it. But this isn't your fight. The firm can't afford to lose any more time or resources on a case that's going nowhere. The optics alone. Do you know how much this is costing us?" Maya's jaw tightened. "It's not about the money." "Oh, it's always about the money, Maya," Caleb retorted, his voice hard. "You're getting too emotionally attached to this, and I'm telling you, it's not worth the risk." "You think I'm emotionally attached?" Maya's voice rose, her patience thinning. "This is about justice. You don't get to dismiss it because it's inconvenient." Caleb's expression didn't change. "The world doesn't work that way, and neither does the law. The sooner you accept that, the better." The words felt like a slap. Maya stood frozen for a moment, then turned to leave. But just before she opened the door, Caleb's voice stopped her. "Maya," he said, his tone now softer, almost too soft. "You're good at what you do. Don't let this case destroy your career." His words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. Maya didn't respond. She just left the room, her heart racing. Outside, she stood in the hallway, leaning against the cold marble wall. Caleb's words echoed in her mind. Was he right? Was this fight really worth the cost? She thought of Tanya, the years of sacrifice, the dreams that had been crushed under the weight of a system built to keep people like her down. But then, the thought of giving up on Tanya, on all of the people who had believed in her, made her heart ache. She couldn't back down now. The text was the turning point. It made her see things differently. But now, Maya realized something, even more chilling. The real battle wasn't just with the justice system, it was with her own firm. Caleb wasn't the only one who was questioning whether this fight was worth it. She felt the pressure mounting as others began to pull away. Back in her office, Maya stared at the message from Tanya again. The words were still glowing on the screen. "I believe in you." Her phone buzzed once more. This time it was an email. Maya opened it and found a letter from Global Co., the very corporation that had wrongfully terminated Tanya. They were offering her a settlement, a large sum of money, far more than what Tanya had initially asked for. It was tempting, wasn't it? The settlement would solve everything, at least financially. But Maya couldn't shake the feeling that it was a trap. Global Co. knew the case would cost them more in the long run. They were buying their way out, hoping to silence Tanya and all the other employees who had suffered under their thumb. It wasn't just about the money. It was about making sure no one ever felt this way again. It was about standing up to the corporations that believed they were untouchable, that thought their power could crush the people they trampled on. Maya needed to make a choice. And that choice would set the stage for everything that would come next. The night felt like an eternity. Maya had spent hours poring over legal documents in her dimly lit office, the faint hum of the fluorescent lights her only company. Her desk was cluttered with case files, witness statements, and pages of legal jargon. But it all blurred together now, none of it seeming to matter. Her eyes were dry, her shoulders tense. She hadn't eaten all day, barely even remembering to drink water. The weight of the decisions she faced was suffocating. Give up the case, accept the settlement, protect her career, or take the stand for Tanya, for justice, and risk it all. The city outside her office window was alive, the glow of streetlights piercing through the darkness. But inside, Maya felt as though the world had gone quiet, the air heavy with uncertainty. And then her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Tanya or her team. It was Caleb. "Maya, you need to make a decision. This is the last time I'm offering you a way out. Let it go. You know this isn't worth the fight." Maya closed her eyes, her hands trembling as she set the phone down. His words had haunted her all day, but now they felt like an ultimatum, one that was being thrust in her face. Was this what it came down to? Her career or doing what was right? But just as she was about to reach for her phone again, there was a knock on the door. Without waiting for her to respond, the door opened, and Rachel walked in, her face pale but determined. "I'm not leaving until we talk," Rachel said quietly, her eyes scanning the office for the first time. The exhaustion from the weeks of hard work, the trials and tribulations were etched on her face. Maya didn't say anything at first, just continued staring at the stack of papers in front of her, as though if she focused hard enough the answer would appear. "You can't give up now," Rachel said, her voice breaking. "We've come this far. You've come this far. Do you know how much this case means to people like us? People who have spent their whole lives watching the world refuse to see them, to hear them?" Maya finally looked up at her eyes tired and filled with a mix of anger and confusion. "I'm not giving up, Rachel. I'm just—" She stopped herself, pressing her lips together. She didn't have the words to explain the exhaustion, the weight of everything. "But you're considering it, aren't you?" Rachel asked, her tone sharp now. "I've seen you look at that settlement offer 100 times tonight trying to make sense of it. It's not about the money, Maya. It's about what's right. You know that." Maya clenched her fists, slamming them onto the desk in frustration. "I know that. But if I take this case to trial and I lose, Tanya's done. She'll never get another chance, and what about me? What happens to everything I've worked for, the firm, my career?" Rachel stepped closer, her voice quiet but resolute. "Then you make sure you don't lose. You fight for the people who can't. Maya, this is why you became a lawyer, right? Not to play it safe, not to follow the rules, but to make a difference. This is that chance." Maya stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor as she walked to the window, her back to Rachel. The night air rushed in, cool and sharp, but it didn't offer her any comfort. She stared at the lights, at the city that had both shaped and broken her. She had grown up here in a world that was constantly trying to hold her back. Now, in this moment, it felt like she was teetering on the edge of something much bigger. Her heart was racing. The room felt like it was closing in around her. "I don't know if I can win this fight," Maya whispered, the vulnerability creeping into her voice. Rachel didn't flinch. She stepped up beside her, standing shoulder to shoulder with her. "You don't have to win alone, you never were. You've got a whole team here and a community behind you." Maya turned toward her, the desperation in her eyes now obvious. "What if I fail? What if everything falls apart and I lose everything?" Rachel's voice softened, but her words were strong. "Then you'll keep fighting, you'll keep pushing. You've taught me that already. You taught me that no matter how hard it gets, you don't back down." Maya's chest tightened, and for a moment she felt like she was suffocating. Everything she'd worked for, her future, her identity, was on the line. The stakes felt impossible. The choice was too large to comprehend. But then, the image of Tanya, the woman who had trusted her, who had told her she believed in her, flashed through her mind. Tanya had given Maya everything she had, all of her pain, her suffering, and her dreams. She couldn't just let it go. "Rachel," Maya said, her voice thick with emotion, "I can't do this without you. We're in this together, Maya. Always." Just then, Maya's phone buzzed once more. This time it was Tanya's name. With shaking hands, Maya unlocked the message, her heart pounding. It was short, just a few lines. "Maya, I know this fight has been hard, but please don't give up on me. On us. I've had my whole life taken from me by people who think they can crush us. I'm not going to let them win. I believe in you. Whatever happens, you've given me something I haven't had in years. Hope. I can't thank you enough." Maya's throat closed. She felt a surge of emotions, pride, fear, and love for the woman who had entrusted her with this battle. She realized in that moment that this wasn't just about Tanya. This was about every person who had ever been silenced, every person who had ever been erased from the story. The fight wasn't just for a case, it was for a future, for justice. It was for everyone who had been made to feel small, Maya had the power to change that, and she wasn't going to back down now. She straightened her back, her shoulders squared. We're going to win this. We're going to take it all the way. Rachel's eyes brightened. You're going to do it. I know you are. Maya looked at the window again, the lights of the city now seeming to reflect a different future. A future she could help shape. She turned to face Rachel, her resolve hardening. We're not just fighting for Tanya, Maya said, her voice steady. We're fighting for all of us. The courtroom was a vast, imposing space. Rows of empty chairs lined the sides, the air thick with tension. Maya stood at the front, her back straight, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been here countless times before, fighting for justice, fighting for the truth. But this time, the stakes felt higher. The gallery was packed, the press was there, and the eyes of the nation seemed to be watching. It wasn't just Tanya's case now, it had become a symbol of a larger battle. Maya had made her decision. There would be no settlement, no quiet retreat. There would only be the truth and the courage to stand by it. It had taken days of late nights, countless phone calls, and more sleepless hours than she cared to count. But Maya was ready. She had gathered her team, prepared her witnesses, and now the moment had arrived. As the judge entered the room, the gavel slammed down. Court is now in session. The room fell silent. Maya's gaze flicked over to Global Co.'s legal team. They were the corporate behemoth, the ones who had tried to silence Tanya with money, who had dismissed her for no reason other than the color of her skin. Maya had seen their arrogance, their cold indifference. But she would not be intimidated by them, not anymore. Tanya sat in the front row, her hands clenched together in her lap, her face a picture of quiet determination. She had been through so much already, and yet here she was, showing up every day, never wavering. Maya felt a surge of respect for her client, for the woman who had endured years of injustice and still managed to stand tall. The trial began with the prosecution's opening statement, laying out Global Co.'s systematic abuse of their employees, particularly the way they had terminated Tanya's employment without cause. The case was strong, but Maya knew this would not be easy. Global Co. had resources, power, and the means to delay or even destroy the truth. But it wasn't just the law that would win this case. It was the people. The truth would emerge through the voices of those who had been silenced for so long. When Maya stood to present her opening statement, she looked directly at the judge, but she could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on her. This is not just about one woman's wrongful termination, she began, her voice steady but unwavering. This is about all the people like Tanya, who have been treated as disposable, who have been denied the chance to pursue their dreams simply because of who they are. This is about fighting for those who have been ignored, for those who have been silenced, and for those who have had their worth questioned by a system that was never meant for them to succeed. The weight of her words hung in the air. There was no turning back now. Maya was all in. She was not just fighting for Tanya. She was fighting for everyone who had ever felt overlooked or mistreated by the very system that was supposed to protect them. As the days passed and the trial wore on, Maya and her team continued to chip away at the defenses of Global Co. They brought forward witness after witness, former employees who had been treated unjustly, who had witnessed the systemic racism, the discrimination, and the outright exploitation. Each testimony was a blow to Global Co.'s carefully constructed image of fairness and professionalism. Slowly, the truth began to emerge. Each witness, each piece of evidence was a step toward justice. But it wasn't until Tanya herself took the stand that the true power of the case became clear. Maya had spent hours preparing Tanya, going over the details of her experience, making sure she was ready to face the relentless questioning from the defense. Global Co.'s attorney, a slick, calculating man, immediately began his attack, trying to discredit Tanya by questioning her character, her emotional state, and even her professional abilities. But Tanya stood her ground, her voice calm and steady, unwavering in the face of his attacks. "You can try to make me doubt myself, Tanya said, her voice clear. But the truth is, I worked hard. I gave everything to this company, and I was thrown away the moment they didn't need me anymore. That's not just wrong. It's a crime. Her words cut through the room like a knife. There was no denying it now. Tanya was speaking for every woman of color who had ever been overlooked, every worker who had ever been treated as expendable. She had become the voice of the silenced, and in that moment, the tide of the trial began to turn. Maya watched from the sidelines, her heart swelling with pride. This was what it was all about. This wasn't just a victory for Tanya. It was a victory for all the people who had been silenced by corporate greed, by injustice, by fear. The defense lawyer sputtered, trying to regain control of the courtroom, but the damage was done. Maya knew that the jury could feel it too, the raw, undeniable truth in Tanya's words. Then came the closing statements. Maya's voice was steady, but there was an unmistakable fire in her words. This case is about accountability. It's about standing up against the people who think they can silence the voices of those who have been overlooked for too long. We are here to demand that Tanya's dignity be restored, that she be given what she deserves, not just as an employee, but as a human being. Global Co. may have the resources, but they don't have the truth on their side. And in the end, that's what matters. The jury deliberated for hours, and the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Maya didn't sit down once, her nerves tight as she waited for the verdict. Tanya's hand was in hers, their fingers intertwined, two people connected by a shared purpose. Finally, the judge returned to the bench. We have reached a verdict. The room fell silent. In the case of Tanya Roberts versus Global Co., the jury finds in favor of the plaintiff. Maya's heart skipped a beat. There it was. Justice. For Tanya. For every person who had been treated unjustly. The room erupted in applause, but Maya didn't hear it. She was already moving toward Tanya, wrapping her in a tight embrace. Tanya's voice cracked as she whispered, "You did it. Maya, you really did it." Maya looked into her eyes, her own tears threatening to spill over. We did it. Together. The victory was sweet, but Maya knew it was bigger than just this one case. This was a turning point, not just for Tanya, but for everyone who had ever been overlooked, for everyone who had been silenced by a system that didn't care. Maya had fought not just for one woman's dignity, but for the dignity of every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. As she left the courtroom, the weight of the victory slowly sank in. She had won, but the fight wasn't over. The world was changing, but it needed more people to step up, to challenge the system, to keep fighting. Maya had done her part. Now, it was time for others to do theirs. And as the sun set over the city, casting a golden glow over the streets, Maya felt a sense of peace settle over her. This battle was over, but the work would continue. And for the first time in a long while, she knew she was on the right side of history. The case of Tanya Roberts versus Global Co. was more than just a single courtroom battle. It was a microcosm of the larger systemic issues that permeate societies worldwide. Issues that have existed for generations, but often remain hidden in plain sight. It was a fight not just for one woman's dignity, but for the recognition of the inherent inequality embedded in the structures that govern our lives. As we reflect on the journey Maya and Tanya embarked upon together, we must step back and look at the broader societal implications of the story. At the core, this narrative sheds light on institutionalized racism and discrimination, issues that have long plagued workplaces, educational institutions, and governments alike. These problems are not just isolated events. They are deeply woven into the fabric of society. The insidious nature of systemic racism means that people of color, particularly Black women like Tanya, often face barriers that are invisible to those who aren't directly impacted. These barriers are not always explicit, such as the blatant use of racial slurs or the refusal to hire based on ethnicity, but they can manifest in subtle, insidious ways. They show up in lower wages for equal work, in limited access to leadership roles, in a lack of representation, and in the emotional and psychological toll that comes with always having to prove one's worth. Tanya's story speaks to the invisible labor that so many marginalized people endure. Labor not just in terms of work, but in the effort to overcome the constant weight of racism. It is the exhausting mental and emotional labor that many, like Tanya, must navigate daily just to hold onto a sliver of dignity in spaces that were never designed for them. From her wrongful termination to the months of legal battles, Tanya's journey is one shared by millions who are forced to grapple with the layers of oppression that society attempts to hide beneath a surface of superficial progress. The ripple effects of systemic racism extend far beyond the individual, reaching deep into communities. In Tanya's case, the battle for justice was not simply a fight for financial compensation, but for the acknowledgement of her humanity, her worth, and her right to be treated with respect. As Maya rightly stated during her closing argument, this wasn't just about one person. It was about a community of people who had been silenced for too long. While the victory in the courtroom was crucial for Tanya's personal journey, the key implications for the broader community are even more significant. For every Black woman who faces workplace discrimination, for every person of color who is unfairly treated based on their race or identity, this case becomes a symbol of hope, a testament to the power of resilience and unity in the face of systemic oppression. Tanya's case highlights the cumulative impact of generational trauma on communities of color. When these issues are left unaddressed, they reverberate across families and communities, creating a cycle that can feel impossible to break. In a world where the gap between the privileged and the marginalized continues to widen, the emotional and economic toll of these injustices cannot be overstated. Tanya's case is not an isolated incident, but a reflection of a larger pattern that has existed for centuries. According to experts, communities of color continue to be disproportionately affected by underemployment, poverty, and limited access to healthcare and education, conditions that are directly linked to the historical exploitation of Black and brown bodies. In workplaces where corporate culture often prioritizes profit over people, employees of color face heightened challenges when it comes to representation, pay equity, and career advancement. Tanya's victory serves as a reminder that individual acts of justice can have a profound impact on collective change. When one person's voice is amplified, it encourages others in the community to raise their voices too, creating a ripple effect that brings systemic issues to the surface. Historical context and cultural reflections. To fully understand the broader themes presented in this case, we must reflect on the historical context of race and discrimination. The story of Tanya Roberts is, in many ways, an echo of the struggles faced by previous generations of marginalized people, particularly Black Americans. History is replete with examples of Black women's labor being undervalued, their contributions dismissed, and their very identities reduced to stereotypes. Take, for example, the Black women who fought for workers' rights during the civil rights movement. Leaders like Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer, and Septima Poinsett Clark were instrumental in organizing the labor movement and advocating for civil rights, but their work was often overshadowed by their male counterparts. Yet, despite facing sexism and racism within their own communities, they continued the struggle, believing that if they could change the systems that oppressed them, they could build a better future for everyone. The history of racial injustice in this country, particularly against Black women, cannot be ignored. The intersections of race, class, and gender compound the challenges that people like Tanya face. Black women have long been subjected to a dual burden. Not only are they marginalized because of their race, but they are also frequently treated as less capable or less competent because of their gender. This layered discrimination has a long history, from slavery to the Jim Crow era to the present day. The 1960s and 1970s civil rights movements gave rise to significant social change, but racial and gender inequality continue to persist in subtle yet pervasive ways. Experts on systemic racism, such as Dr. Ibram X. Kendi and Dr. Kimberlé Crenshaw, have written extensively about the mechanisms that uphold these inequalities. Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, examines how structures of power are designed to maintain inequality. while Crenshaw's theory of intersectionality explains how race and gender interact to create unique forms of discrimination that cannot be understood by looking at each factor separately. These insights provide a deeper understanding of the challenges faced by people like Tanya, and they call for action from those in power to address these systemic issues head-on. The story of Tanya Roberts is one of resilience, justice, and the power of solidarity. It is a reminder that when we fight for what is right, we don't just change the lives of individuals, we change entire systems. The systemic issues raised in this story, such as workplace discrimination, racism, and inequality, are part of a much larger conversation about how we build a society that truly values every individual, regardless of their race or gender. The victory achieved in the courtroom is only one part of the journey. The fight for justice does not end with one case or one victory. It continues as long as systemic inequities remain in place. Maya's decision to stand with Tanya was an act of bravery, but it was also an act of hope. Hope that the future could be different, that justice could prevail, and that each of us, no matter our background, can make a difference. As we reflect on the broader implications of this story, we are reminded that the struggle for equality is not over. It is an ongoing process, one that requires the commitment of individuals, communities, and institutions alike. We must continue to raise our voices, to demand accountability, and to push for a world where everyone, regardless of their race or identity, is treated with the dignity and respect they deserve. The road to equity is long, but every step forward brings us closer to a more just and inclusive society. As we come to the end of Tanya Roberts' story, it's impossible not to feel the weight of everything that has unfolded. The triumph of justice, the strength of the human spirit, and the unrelenting fight for equality remind us all of the importance of standing up for what is right. But this story is far from over. In fact, it's only just begun. Tanya's victory in the courtroom wasn't just a personal win. It was a win for all those who've been silenced by systemic oppression, for every voice that has ever been ignored because of race, gender, or any other barrier designed to keep us apart. It was a moment of collective power, a reminder that when we come together, we can break down the walls that divide us and build something better. But the fight doesn't end with this case. This is where you come in. Every one of us has a role to play in shaping a more just, inclusive world. Tanya's story is a call to action for us all to reflect on the ways we contribute to society, not just through our actions, but through the beliefs we hold, the biases we unknowingly carry, and the systems we support. Now is the time for us to take that reflection and turn it into real, tangible change. First, educate yourself. Take the time to learn about systemic racism and the ways it impacts marginalized communities. Understand the barriers that prevent equal access to opportunities for so many, and recognize that true equality cannot exist without understanding the deep-seated structures that perpetuate discrimination. There are books, documentaries, podcasts, and countless resources available for you to explore. Knowledge is power, and the more we know, the better equipped we are to challenge the systems that harm others. Next, speak out. Every time we remain silent in the face of injustice, we allow it to continue. The next time you witness discrimination, whether in the workplace, in school, or on the streets, speak up. It can be intimidating, but the small act of standing up for someone else can have an enormous impact. Don't let another moment of injustice pass without action. When we raise our voices, we amplify the voices of those who've been silenced for far too long. Support those who are fighting for change. Whether it's through donations, volunteering, or simply lending an ear to someone in need, there are countless ways you can support organizations and individuals working to address inequality. Find a cause that resonates with you, whether it's racial justice, women's rights, LGBTQ+ rights, or any other area, and find a way to contribute, no matter how big or small. Your involvement matters, and together we can create a groundswell of change. But most importantly, we must remember the power of empathy. At the heart of every story like Tanya's, there is a shared humanity that binds us all. It's easy to feel disconnected from others' struggles when they are different from our own. But the truth is, we all have the capacity for kindness, for compassion, for understanding. Empathy is what bridges divides. Empathy is what pushes us to take action when we see injustice. And empathy is what will ultimately bring us closer to the world we all deserve, a world where equality, kindness, and justice are not ideals but realities. Let this story of Tanya Roberts serve as a reminder of the resilience that lies within us all. In the face of adversity, Tanya never gave up. She fought not just for her own dignity, but for the dignity of others. Her journey was long, difficult, and at times seemingly impossible. But through it all, she held on to hope, a hope that justice would prevail and that the truth would come to light. You too have the power to fight for justice in your own way. You don't need to be a lawyer or an activist to make a difference. Your voice, your actions, and your commitment to standing up for what's right can create a ripple effect that will change lives. The work is far from over, but the momentum is building. We can no longer afford to look the other way. The time for action is now. So I challenge you right now to reflect on what you can do to create change. Will you stand up when you see someone being treated unfairly? Will you educate yourself and those around you about the power of empathy and understanding? Will you take the small steps that, collectively, will lead to a world where no one is held back because of their race, their gender, or their background? Together we can do more than just hope for change. We can make it happen. We are the voices of the future, and the future is one where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. A future where stories like Tanya's don't just end with courtroom victories, but with a world transformed. One step at a time, one act of justice at a time. Take action. Be the change. And together, we will build a world where equality is not just a dream, but a reality. Thank you for watching, and remember, change starts with you. Share this story, start a conversation, and keep fighting for justice.